radio talk show host Melik Abdul and Democratic strategist and former member of the Kansas State House, Raj Goyal. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. Melik, let's start with you. You know, Trump announced that he will not be inviting former Ambassador Nikki Haley and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to join his upcoming administration. Not entirely surprising, but is he putting her aside because of her previous criticisms of him? Is that how you read it?
I think that Nikki Haley's time in the Republican Party, at least as far as an administration under a Donald Trump, just had served this time. Nikki Haley did exactly what she needed to do to actually get us to the red wave that was ultimately delayed. But I think that she will continue to have a voice in the Republican Party. She just won't have a voice in the Donald Trump administration. And I think that many people feel the same about Mike Pompeo, representing a more establishment wing of the Republican Party. And Donald Trump will move in a different direction this cycle. I think he'll still have the establishment behind him for sure. But those two particular, I think they'll still have a voice in the Republican Party. And I thought that Donald Trump's statement was very respectful of both of them.
You know, the political podcast Pod Save America, that's something that we've been listening to and watching, had strong words for President Biden and his decision to stay in the race for so long. Many people questioning that. Let's take a listen.
Joe Biden's decision to run for president again was a catastrophic mistake. It just was. And he and his inner circle, they refused to believe the polls. They refused to believe he was unpopular. They refused to acknowledge until very late that anyone could be upset about inflation, and they just kept telling us that his presidency was historic and it was the greatest economy ever. We just heard him again say that it's the greatest economy ever. Clearly, 70–80% of voters don't believe that. They don't believe that about their own personal financial situation, but they just keep telling us that.
Raj, I mean, what do you think? Should President Biden have stepped aside earlier? That seems to be a big talking point right now.
Yeah, well, I think that there's obviously a good thrust to what John is saying there. Of course, the Biden White House misread the tea leaves, and there's going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterback. I think what John gets wrong there is that it's not just Joe Biden in the White House. The Democratic Party itself, in terms of our establishment in Washington, also went along with this. So remember, there was a primary process. Dean Phillips, whose name hasn't come up much since the election, he ran against Joe Biden, and he made this case, and nobody really flocked to his side. And David Axelrod, the famous strategist and now TV commentator, he was sending the warning shots in Q4 of 2023, saying that Joe Biden has fundamental problems to the electorate. So, you know, I would say to your earlier segment, to Jackie's good comments, there's really two poles of the debate in the party right now. And I'm working on a piece actually about sort of this ongoing civil war in the party. I actually think it's healthy, and it's painful, and we wish it wouldn't have happened as Democrats, but we need to have this discussion. And the one poll is the Bernie Sanders, Chris Murphy poll. And the other is something that used to be out of England. It was called One More Heave. And this was the idea of the Labor Party, which is, we're doing okay. We just need to keep doubling down. We almost got there. And so there's a wing of the party, excuse me, that is actually trying to say, listen, if we had just done a few things better, we were fundamentally okay. I personally find myself very much in the former camp, which is if we don't take the fundamental lesson of what's called the realignment, we lost every demographic group. And one thing for your listeners, I think that hasn't been pointed out very much, Kamala Harris actually regressed with Joe Biden with Black women. If you just sit and stew about that for a second, about how fundamentally across the board, how comprehensive this repudiation was. I'm a technology CEO now. We would call this a product market fit that doesn't exist.
Wow,
and so the product market fit is happening with Donald Trump. And for me, as somebody who reveres Franklin Roosevelt, he's spinning in his grave right now, thinking that the working class of America is with the Republican Party. And so the insider argument is, oh, look at all these technocratic things we did. But as John actually said in that segment, nobody feels that. Nobody believes that. And that's why actually I will say one last thing is that I actually, unfortunately, did predict that Trump would win the election. And I think one thing that we've got a fundamental problem on the Democratic side is going into 2016, we all thought that Hillary would blow Trump out. We know what happened. This year it was cautious optimism. But if you look at the facts, the warning signs were quite clear.
Raj, I'm going to leave that there, but I do want to mention yesterday we interviewed an undecided voter who had been undecided throughout the campaign cycle. Her name's Mary, a Black woman, and she said to me in our network yesterday that she voted for Trump because she did not feel that Kamala Harris ever spoke to her. She said, I don't see myself in her. Malik, black woman, yes. Malik, President Biden and President-elect Trump are set to meet in the Oval Office on Wednesday. I want to move on to that. How do you think this meeting's going to go? It sounds like they're both going in respectively. They have to do this meeting. So how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I just wanted to throw this out there. Joe Biden got about 63% of the voting in California. Hillary Clinton got 61%. Kamala Harris got 57. So I think that this is going to be a great meeting. This is the Joe Biden, the statesman. And I think that this is important, especially at this time. There are a lot of raw feelings, obviously, due to the loss of Kamala Harris. So I think that this is a very good overture from the Biden administration. And I think it's the responsible thing to do. They'll have a great conversation. And after this, and I suspect that Joe Biden will be at the inauguration of Donald Trump in the next year. So I think this is a good move for Joe Biden for sure.
Malik, there are some legitimate people out there who, I mean, people have legitimate concerns, I should say. They're afraid of a Trump presidency again. They're afraid of what is coming down the pike next. What do you have to say about that?
Well, we just have to refer to what Donald Trump did. I think the advantage that Donald Trump had is that he was president of the United States. So when you look at a number of the metrics, people feel as if that they were better under Donald Trump's administration. So people don't really remember COVID was that interruption of everything, but people don't remember the actual policy. A lot of what we talked about with Donald Trump, a lot of that was due to Donald Trump's personality, things that Donald Trump said. But that's why you really can't pinpoint people down on specific policies that impacted them in a negative way. So I think that Donald Trump will govern much like he did the last time around, and much like any president obviously would. But there are fears. I think that those fears are, I understand where they come from, but I expected them to be allayed by the end of Donald Trump's term.
Raj, Republicans now have control of the Senate and possibly could take control of the House. This is something that we're waiting for to see how this plays out. Do you expect to see a lot of bipartisanship over the next few years on this, or is everyone going to be able to get along? What do you think?
What do you think? And in fact, what I would say, it's not really a trifecta, it's a quadfecta, because the historical analogy here would be 2000, in which we were shocked when George Bush lost the popular vote, but then they swept all three branches, but they didn't have a packed Supreme Court. So now you have a 6-3 ultra-right conservative majority on the Supreme Court, all three branches of government, or the two branches of government, perhaps. So I think it is the odds of bipartisanship. We've seen the crazy come out of Mike Johnson's caucus over the last 2 years. And so I do think this isn't just wishful thinking, that if you look at the historical data, the odds of there being kumbaya, right now we are literally hours after the election. We're less than a week after the election. Right now, everything's feeling good. Normal order will likely restore, in which there will be dysfunction on their side. As Malik was mentioning, let's wait and see. Donald Trump is a much more seasoned executive now. He has been in that office 4 years. And I listened to him on Joe Rogan. I don't know if you've had a chance to do that. It's 3 hours. He talked a lot about how he would hire. And, there's a lot of commentary now about Susie Wiles being chief of staff and them being more orderly. I'm not a Trump observer in that regard, but I would say the odds of bipartisanship and the odds of there being a lot of consensus in Washington, I think, are low because the stakes are very high. For Democrats now, and if I could just quickly respond to this point around the fact that Donald Trump had been president before, the job of a campaign is to prosecute a case. There is a really easy way to talk about how things went very haywire during Donald Trump. It was probably not productive to spend time calling him a fascist, because that really is not only, I think, a concept that people don't really get their heads around. It's not relevant if I'm trying to pay my mortgage, as Bernie Sanders said in his clip.
And Malik,
so that is a fundamental disconnect that the Democratic establishment has with the American people. And that is something we are going to have to work on very hard over the next 2 and 4 years.
All right, Malik, I need you to get in there and respond to that. Was just a lot to unpack. So I'll give you an opportunity to respond to all that.
Well, I think there's some ultimate truth in there. But again, Donald Trump has the advantage of being president of the United States. There are many people that feared what would Joe Biden do as president. Obviously, there are concerns about the economy, but the world wasn't destroyed under Joe Biden any more than democracy will end under Donald Trump. And I think that's where a lot of that fear comes from, that democracy will simply end. And the United States government just does not function in that way.
You know, as we take a look at how the cabinet's going to form, Elon Musk, RFK Jr. expected to possibly be in the running to be a part of the cabinet. Where do you guys see that? Should outsiders be allowed to take those positions?
Sure,
I'll go first.
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead, Malik.
No, I was going to say absolutely
Malik, yeah.
that should happen. Yeah, but what I'll say to that, the notion
We
of
just had some
Elon Musk,
bipartisanship there. That was good.
yes. Elon Musk or even an RFK for that matter, what I believe that they'll ultimately be in some type of special assistant to the president for insert whatever that is. I don't think that they'll go to head an actual cabinet agency because the government is a huge bureaucracy. And so I do see them going into the not White House, but the EEOB, which is next to the White House, on to handle some issue. But I don't expect they'll get cabinet appointments themselves.
All right, I've got to leave it there. We want to thank you both very much, Republican strategist Melik Abdul and Democratic strategist Raj Goyal. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
so
We'll
much.
talk
Happy
again.
Sunday.
Okay, thank you guys.